Hello, it's Angelo Caruso. Welcome to another episode of the Talk to Me podcast. I'm with Jordanna Mallach today. Hi, Jordanna.
Hello.
We're going to talk about some work that she did early on in the Ukraine-Russia conflict, because I've been trying to help people understand what's really happening over there. And it's nothing like talking with people who either were involved in some way and not as bystanders, but not as people watching the news. Jordanna was actively involved, and she's got a particular perspective that I think will be very useful to anybody watching today. If you're watching on the Angelo Caruso YouTube channel, know that you can listen to any of these interviews while you're on the treadmill, on the Podbean or iTunes platforms. If you're listening on the podcast, you can also watch any of these interviews on my YouTube channel. If you're watching on YouTube, please tap that red subscribe button and ring that silver notification bell so that you are notified of all new content. Jordanna, welcome back home.
Thank you.
I understand through a Rotary friend that you were serving in your post or in your position. I don't know how you talk about the National Guard. You were deployed in Kosovo for a while there, the last couple of weeks of February. And you had a very interesting assignment, something that was a lead up to something that we could never dream that we'd be talking about here on March 23rd. Tell us a little bit about what happened when you got that call, what took you to Kosovo, and what you did when you got there.
Sure. So I was deployed to Kosovo in June originally, and I was there serving as a logistics officer at the NATO headquarters in Camp Film City, which is the headquarters of Kosovo forces. And in that capacity, I worked with soldiers from 28 different countries. And our mission was to ensure a safe and secure environment in Kosovo. And I was serving there. I was a US soldier, but I was serving in a NATO headquarters in a NATO assignment.
Yeah, you mentioned to me that although we're mentioning a lot of military terms, NATO, et cetera, that it was a personal effort. It was not a military effort. Can you draw this distinction for us?
Sure. So when things started to happen in the Ukraine, I worked with a Ukrainian, there were soldiers from lots of different countries, and we had soldiers from the Ukraine as well, and started talking to them about what could be done. I think, like a lot of people all over the world, I was disturbed by what was happening. I wanted to do something. I didn't know what was really needed or what I could do. And in talking to him, and talking, to the other soldiers I worked with in my chain of command, it became very clear that a military or NATO response wasn't appropriate. That wasn't what we were looking at, but that there was an opportunity in soldiers' personal time after the duty day to pull together donations that we could send to the Ukraine through already established humanitarian supply lines that were being stood up really all across Europe to try to move supplies to the locations where they were needed. So working with the senior national representative from the Ukraine, who was assigned to the headquarters with me, we started to pull together some supplies and just, ask the other soldiers that we worked with for donations in a very grassroots, pass the hat around the bar kind of manner. And then I started reaching out on Facebook to friends back in the United States, and the response was just overwhelming. I think, like me, there was a lot of people that wanted to do something. And through the cash that we raised amongst the different nations where I served, and the money from the United States and from other nations reached back to their friends and families, we were able to pull together a significant amount of money to purchase items that were needed.
It's so interesting to me, all of the nuance and all of the things that are happening beneath the veneer of the news reports that we see, on our favorite news platforms. Here's a bunch of military personnel from all over the world donating their personal time and efforts in the early stages of the conflict. to do what they thought was right. We're almost a month later now. NATO is still not involved. A lot of people are confused about that. Tell us why, although everybody knows what the right thing to do is, we're not able to do the right thing at this stage yet.
So, I mean, I'm certainly not any sort of expert, but from my perspective, and the mission that we had in Kosovo was very specific. We were there under Resolution 1244. We had a specific thing to accomplish. NATO has a very, a set of rules and guidelines.
Go on. Resolution 1244 is what?
It's a UN resolution about maintaining safety and security in Kosovo.
Thank you.
And it provided the guidance for the work that NATO was doing in Kosovo and the work that me and the other soldiers that served there.
Okay, so that's why you were all there. And then the Ukraine thing happens.
Right. And so that would be under a different set. Article 5 is, this notion that attack on one country is an attack on all those members of NATO. And Ukraine not being a member of NATO is a significant factor in, all of the people who are way above me making the decisions that they're making about how to respond or what a response should look like.
I understand that there's an onboarding process, not to get too into the weeds on this, but there's an onboarding process that allows countries to join NATO, and that Ukraine was, I don't know, in line to be a member, but they're not officially a member, which prevents countries like the United States and other members of NATO from engaging in conflict with Russia, because it would be a violation of what? International law, NATO guidelines? How does that work?
I mean, I can't speak to the process of Ukraine joining, NATO. It's not something, I'm at all familiar with. But I do know that the countries that belong to NATO are afforded, rights and privileges with regards to that, and those that aren't, don't.
Okay, that's my understanding too. Let's go back to the reason everybody was in Kosovo. This is such an interesting infrastructure. I think something that most people don't understand. If we could call that, you called it a NATO headquarters in Kosovo, is that correct?
Well, it's a NATO mission. So the headquarters of that mission, of the KFOR it's referred to, Kosovo Forces, is, it's a 2-star command. And you can, it rotates, currently there's a Hungarian general in charge. Previously, there was an Italian general. And it's, one of several NATO missions that are happening. Our headquarters is in Naples. We fall under Joint Force Headquarters Naples in terms of NATO command.
So how many of these hubs are there all over the world? 12? 2 dozen, 3 dozen? Oh,
for all of NATO, I wouldn't know.
I didn't know they had this kind of structure. That's why I'm asking.
No, I think you can, if you were to look up, through Google, for lack of, but if you went to Joint Force Headquarters, if you look at Joint Forces Command, excuse me, Naples, you would see that KFOR mission.
Okay, thank you.
Underneath them.
And when you say 2-star command, I'm such a
2-star general.
There's a 2-star general in charge of that hub or that headquarters.
Yes.
Okay. Again, a stupid question. How many stars can a general have? What's the potential there?
I guess ultimately, 5, 4 or 5 stars, depending.
Okay. And I asked the same question. But then you're
talking about, joint chiefs of staff level, and well, far above me.
I asked the same question when I'm in a hotel and they brag about being a 3-star hotel. I'm like, well, how many stars are there? Tell me. I need to know where I stand. All right, so sure, 2-star command in Kosovo. And what kind of supplies were you getting together at this early stage, the last 2 weeks of February?
So based on the responses that we we had received baby formula was top on the list. So baby formula, diapers, like baby food as well. We also blankets, cots, long underwear, wool socks, as well as military boots and sleeping bags, blankets, women's sanitary products.
It's interesting how things have played out. We now know that many of those supplies are being used by Ukrainians that are trapped in underground shelters. They're not able to escape cities like Mariupol. It's interesting how they were provided for. Probably didn't get nearly enough of what they needed, but you guys certainly helped. Wow.
So there's logistical distribution points that have been set up along the borders of Ukraine, and so the humanitarian assistance was destined for those locations, and from there it would get distributed to where it was needed.
There's been a lot made of Russia surrounding Ukraine on three sides, leaving only the Poland border open. Why didn't the Russians just close off that supply line from Poland and make short work of this? Why do you suppose, and I realize you just may be guessing, by the way, tell everybody your rank in the National Guard.
I'm a major. I'm a major in the National Guard. So I am not an expert by any means, but Poland certainly being a part of NATO there would be a different response.
Yes.
Which, who knows? I mean, certainly I have no idea what is happening inside of the mind of the leadership in Russian that is making these choices and decisions, but perhaps they are, understood, the response might be different if they were to expand, beyond the borders. Who knows?
Yeah, nobody knows. It doesn't stop us from exercising conjecture, and I had the occasion to be at a Rotary event last weekend with someone who teaches at a war college. He's a Rotarian. He has a regular job. He's going to be president of his club. We were doing presidents-elect training in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And we were talking over drinks one night about the endgame here and what seems like it would be possible. It's such an unusual gambit. There doesn't seem to be a win for Putin in any way. I mean, he's already a pariah. They've had crippling sanctions, more probably being enacted today. It's just an interesting scenario. Do you have any personal opinion about this? Can you speak about it?
I think like a lot of soldiers, or everyone probably, I lay in bed at night sort of wondering and fearful of what's next, or what would lead someone to do something like that. And sometimes it just seems too overwhelming to even comprehend. And I think for me, the best way that I could process it was to just try to focus on the Ukrainian soldiers that I was working with and making them feel in some small way that maybe, that they had support, or that they felt that there was some support or some assistance, and just creating a place, and sending prayers to their families and listening when they wanted to talk, and asking questions when it seemed like they were interested in talking, and respecting when they didn't. Thankfully, most of the families of the soldiers I was serving with were safe, but a lot of them were grappling with that decision of, do you stay where you are, or do you get on the road and try to move your children primarily, to safety somewhere else? Because there's risks staying where you are, and there's risks to getting on the road. And yes. I felt like, as a parent, I have a 14-year-old daughter, and I mean, that is an incomprehensible decision in my mind to have to make and to weigh that. Many of the soldiers that I served with were part of families that were dual military. So they were serving in Kosovo. Their spouse was a member of the military serving back in Ukraine. And when things started to go awry, there was children that needed to be cared for. And how do you take care of that when both parents are in the military? And, making that decision of when you decide to go, where are you going to go? Many of the soldiers had relatives in countries that bordered the Ukraine, and they were able to get their children eventually to, an in-law or grandmother, an aunt, an uncle, someone, outside of Ukraine where the children could stay.
Yes.
And some made the decisions to wait it out. But everyone that I spoke with, and I understand, everyone that I interacted with from Ukraine was currently serving in the military, deeply patriotic, deeply committed, did not want their family to be too far away. They wanted them ready to return once the situation was safe for them to do so. Deeply, deeply patriotic to their country.
I'm assuming, Jordanna, that if you rotated back home, that some of the Ukraine soldiers that you served with in Kosovo have also rotated back home and were no doubt immediately pressed into service. Have you been able to keep in touch with any of them?
So currently, the soldiers that I work with were still in Kosovo, but I believe that plans were being made for their return.
Okay. And when they get back, it's going to be all hands on deck,
Yeah, I'm sure they will be very busy.
Yes, yes. Speaking of day jobs, as we were a bit ago, you are were elected to town supervisor in a place called Harrietstown, New York, named after who?
That would be an interesting question. I do not know how our name came to be, but I will definitely have to look into that. Yes, I had the privilege of being elected in November while I was serving overseas. It was very unexpected how everything pans out. How
did you run that campaign?
There's a lot of rules I'm really grateful to my husband and the people that, the fellow town council members that I was running on the ticket with. They did an incredible job of advocating for me. And I'd been working as a council person for the last, 4 years. So I'm grateful that my community thought highly enough of my work, even in my absence, to elect me. So I took office in January. It was a lot of late nights doing my Army job during the day and then town council work in the evening. So I'm fortunate now to be back in the town hall and on a daily basis, talking to people and getting things done.
Well, I'm sure you'll be an asset to the people of Harrietstown, just as you're an asset to the National Guard, Major Jordanna. I want to close with a quick mention about how important it is to be good neighbors. You mentioned to me before we pressed record today that you are very close to Montreal, Canada. How far?
About an hour and a half, I would say, if that, depending on traffic.
Yeah,
and the
I'm
border.
Here in Rochester, Michigan, about 40 minutes from the Detroit-Windsor border, which is the largest border crossing in North America. And although we've enjoyed a great relationship with Canada through the years, it kind of underscores, in the context of our discussion about Poland and Ukraine and Russia, how important it is to treat your neighbors well and for us to take care of each other. I so appreciate all that you do in your service with the National Guard. It's been my pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you so much for all you do to make the world a better place.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jordanna.